As Democrats look to regroup before the 2028 presidential election, the first step for any Democrat contender is the 2028 Democrat presidential primary. And there was a lot of speculation around former Vice President, 2024 loser Kamala Harris, and what she will do next. Despite having extremely high name recognition at this point and a historic role as a vice president, a senator, an attorney general from the most populous state in America, several factors suggest that she will face some of the most significant hurdles of anyone in securing the Democrat nomination in 2028 if she decides to run. So today, we are going to be looking at the key reasons why Kamala Harris will lose the 2028 Democrat primary if she chooses to run. There's many things you can look at: her past performance, the current political dynamics, competition, really her lackluster performance in 2024, the fact that she is not changing tactics from 2024 and post the 2024 election. So you have to start off simply with the 2024 election and the loss and the lasting impact. Kamala Harris was defeated decisively by Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. It will cast a shadow over her political career for the rest of her life. She lost the Electoral College by huge margins and was the first Democrat to lose the popular vote to Donald Trump. One of three. She's the only Democrat to lose the popular vote to Donald Trump. And this loss is particularly her failure to win any of the 7 battleground states. Even when Trump lost in 2020, he still carried one of the battleground states. And they were close. You look at places like Georgia. Go back to the presidential election. Look, these are within what? What are you looking at here? You're looking within, 10,000 votes, 10,000 votes, 10,000 votes. It's like, these are extremely close elections. Unlike 2024, where Trump's winning by 2 percentage points. He's winning by 5 percentage points, 3 percentage points. Yes, Wisconsin was close, but even if Harris won Wisconsin, he'd still sweep the election. He would still sweep the election. And this will, the fact that she spent $1.5 billion in the matter of about 103 days, had the entire back-end of the Democrat establishment, the entire back-end of the mainstream media, and she underperformed completely due to her inability to connect with key voters. The Democrat Party typically has, I should say, in politics, there's a tendency to move forward from nominees who lose general elections because they're a liability. And many donors see the Democrat Party, that they're known for killing their losers, being done with them. Obviously, we know in 2024 that was not how Donald Trump, that's just not the way the Republican Party went. Donald Trump really rebuked history, defied norms, but I don't think Harris is that candidate. I don't think she's going to defy historical norms like Donald Trump did. Because look, she tied herself too closely with Biden, didn't put any daylight between her and Biden. Biden was extremely unpopular. And I really think that the narrative of being a failure, it sticks. There's a lot of negative things associated with her that are just going to stick that I don't think she can shake. And this perception is going to discourage a lot of primary voters from giving her another shot. There's a lot of people who don't even want to give her a shot in California in 2026, let alone in a primary for the presidential nomination. Really? Did the Democrats want to risk being locked out of power for another 4 years? The biggest thing, I think, there were a couple big things, but one of the biggest was completely her inability to separate herself from Biden. You remember, we were on The View. She was sitting there. Is there anything you would do differently? I can't think of a single thing. She struggled. She struggled so badly. And that was a softball. That was a toss-up, a layup to distinguish herself from the Biden administration, whose approval ratings were like 39, 40% for much of his term. And like we said, the infamous comment on The View when she said, not a thing comes to mind when asked about what she would do differently from Biden. I can think of a lot of things. And that became a Trump campaign ad and underscored her complete inability to carve out a lane with independence, to carve out this independent identity. She was completely in the shadow of Biden the entire time. This moment completely highlighted her ties to the most unpopular administration in American history, which was a gift to the Republican Party. It was a complete gift to them. And I think she would need to convince voters that she can do that in 2028, but I just don't think she can. I don't think she represents a fresh vision in the party. Look at her performance with key demographics in 2024. You'd think because she's a minority, she's a woman, you'd perform so good. Well, here's the thing. Americans don't care about identity politics. The majority of Americans do not care about identity politics. They care about economic policy. They care about who's going to bring down cost. They don't care about, they, them. They don't care. There's a lot of these things they don't care about. And they completely struggled, Harris did, to resonate with crucial, historical Democrat voters. Black men, Latinos in general, who shifted to Republicans in significant numbers. Exit polls showed that Trump expanded his 2020 margin in almost 2,400 counties nationwide. Trump expanded his margin. Look at this. You can see, I don't know if we can do this by down to the county level for the entire map, but look at this. Every state moved towards the Republican Party. Every state, except for Nebraska's 1st congressional district, which moved to Harris by about 2 percentage points. But look at this. Look at all of these counties that moved towards that. Not a single county in Florida moved away from Donald Trump from 2020 to 2024. Look at Minnesota. Look, Cook and Lake County and Lincoln County were the only 2 counties. Everywhere else moved towards Donald Trump. Everywhere else moved towards Donald Trump in the 2024 election, including huge amounts of people that have been supporting Democrats for decades. Harris underperformed with Latino voters, with young voters, groups that Democrats heavily rely on. They rely on them so heavily. And her campaign focused on issues like abortion access, which may have been effective with female voters, even though that she didn't expand her margin of victory with females. That's it. She held where she was at with female voters and lost everywhere else. And she did a terrible job addressing different issues like the Israel-Hamas conflict, alienated a lot of progressive and minority voters. There's a lot of Palestinian Americans that argue that Harris's failure to address the humanitarian crisis, which we're not even going to get into that, cost her a lot of support among communities that advocate for this. There's so many different things. You look at her perception of elitism, lack of populism. Harris's campaign has been criticized by almost everyone, left and right, for projecting a out of touch elite image, which clashed with the Democrats' party's need to reconnect with working class voters. Her appearance at high-profile events like the Met Gala in San Francisco reinforces this perception even after the election. She focused on these, issues, these micro-social issues over material issues. They were focused more on wealth redistribution or economic stability that failed to address voters' economic concerns, their anxieties, which was a key factor in Trump's 2024 victory. Harris was more focused on attacking Donald Trump, calling him an insurrectionist, calling him a rapist, calling him a felon, than outlining her own vision for America and moving forward and why people should vote for her. Because the reality is, being the alternative to Donald Trump is not enough in 2024. It's just not. And I think one of the biggest issues that Kamala Harris has is simply the fact that she has not rebranded. She's not doing anything different from what she did in 2024. Now, during the 2024 election, she refused. After she was the party nominee, it took her 3 weeks to give a press conference. She would not get out into vulnerable situations with the press. Even the press that were on her side. These are literally people who are on your side, and you're refusing to get out in front of them. You're refusing to answer questions. You don't go to the Al Smith dinner. You send in a 3-minute pre-recorded video. You don't go on the Joe Rogan show because you want him to come to you. There's certain things to be topics to be off limits, and you want it to be an hour long. Okay, we all know anyone who watches Joe Rogan, you go to him, it's 3 hours long, nothing is off topic. You don't get to dictate this. You don't get to dictate where you meet voters. You are supposed to go to voters where they are at. She refused to be in any sort of situation that would take any risk. Everything was scripted. Everything was pre-recorded. There was nothing where you're getting into a vulnerable situation, which is the complete opposite of what Trump does. He gets himself into risky situations 4 times a day. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but you're not going to get the reward if you're not swinging, if you're not taking the shot. And she's continuing to make those same mistakes. You know, there was recently a convention, the Democrat convention in California. Okay, Kamala Harris is seen as potentially the front runner for the governor's election in 2026. But what does she do? She doesn't show up to the convention. Her running mate Tim Walz does. She sends in a 3 or 4 minute pre-recorded video. How is that attracting people? How is that getting people to, you are the former vice president of the United States. You had access to one of the biggest fundraising networks in the world. You're the former attorney general of the most populous state in America. You're the former senator of the most populous state in America. And what are you doing? Your running mate, who's a bumbling idiot, is out there, or I guess your former running mate, who's a complete moron, is out there and is probably the most active Democrat seeking the nomination in 2028. He's out there doing everything. He may sound like an idiot. He may look like an idiot, but at least he's getting himself out there. He's putting himself out there. Putting himself in a position to win, to connect with voters. And what is she doing? She gave a speech to some, Australian real estate agents? Doesn't show up in Anaheim for the state convention. What are you doing? You were the front runner for the governor in 26 in Poland for the Democrats. You're leading most polls right now. What are you doing? You have all this ammunition on your side and you're just letting it burn out. You have all this coal. You could plow yourself into the next election, but you're so effing stupid. You can't fix stupid. You just can't. And this lady is just plain out dumb. I thought Tim Walz was the dummy on the campaign trail. No, it's really Kamala Harris. Because at least Tim Walz is putting himself out there. She's just sitting behind, she just expects that this is going to be handed to her. Well, that's what happens when you're a DEI hire. That's what happens when you become vice president simply because Joe Biden says he's going to nominate or pick someone who's a black woman of color. You didn't earn it. You just happened to fit the identity box that the Democrats were demanding at that time. Even when you are artificially rose to the occasion, you still lacked the vision. You still didn't have a plan for the future. And you're going to try and reemerge at you're going to give a 10, 15 minute speech at high dollar events rather than getting out there on the campaign trail, bold policy proposals. You do not inspire any confidence in anyone. She completely lacks a strategic vision for the future, which is needed to dominate a primary field, and even in an election, a general election. And she seems petrified. Just the anxiety is completely shutting down. It's what do you call that, where you see so much and you just don't do anything? Analysis paralysis. You just see all these things you could be doing, so you don't do anything. She's petrified of anger and people inside of her party. And to win in 2028, Harris needs to project confidence and a clear platform, but she never will, because the only reason she is here is because she checked some boxes. That's it. The only reason she was vice president was because she was a woman and she was a woman of color. That's it. She was probably one of the worst senators in American history. Probably one of the dumbest. Well, outside of Mazie Hirono, who's a complete fucking moron. Biggest moron in the Senate right now. And what is Harris doing right now? Relying on name recognition? Identity politics? That's not enough to win. You won 3% in the 2020 primaries? This is a complete joke. Anyone, if you look at her resume, you take her name off the resume, and put anyone else's name on there, they'd be a front runner with 50%, 60% support right now. There'd be no question who is the leader of the party. Like, there was a vacuum created right here because she is not stepping up to the occasion. And that's why she's a DEI hire. She totally is. She was only here because she checked the boxes during 2020. That's it. And maybe was seen as an insurance policy for Biden. Like, oh yeah, you want to 25 me. You want to pull the 25th Amendment on me. Good luck. This is who your new president will be? Really? I think it's the same thing that's been happening for a decade now. You had Obama, who was a highly intelligent person, very hateful of America, but highly intelligent person, is like, look, I need to pick a vice president who's not going to outshine me, who it's seen as an insurance policy for myself. So he picks Joe Biden. And then Joe Biden's running and he's like, look, I need to pick someone who's not going to outshine me, who's an insurance policy for me. So he picks Kamala Harris. So now we're scraping at the bottom of the Democrat barrel right now. And Kamala Harris is like, well, I need someone who's not going to outshine me. And so she picks Tim Walz. And you know what? He didn't outshine her during the campaign. Post 2024, Tim Walz has been the most active Democrat in the 2028 nomination process. Hands down. Maybe AOC is competing with that. But AOC or Tim Walz, most active Democrats. We can see now that Kamala Harris was the effing moron. Tim Walz is incompetent too. He's inept, but at least he's got some drive. At least he's getting out there and doing something. But obviously, they both would be terrible candidates. They both would be terrible presidents. The Democrats have probably one of the weakest benches we've seen in decades. Like, look at this. We've got Jasmine Crockett and AOC. Please. I'm just waiting for Rashida Tlaib's name to pull up on this list here. We have Pete Buttigieg, who, African-American turnout will drop 10 or 15% if he's the nominee. Rahm Emanuel, who, and look, I lean to the right. Rahm Emanuel wants to pull his party back to the center. I don't think they're going to let that happen. You have Gina Raimondo. I think she's got good ties with the business community. She's more of the elitist in the party. And then you have Tim Walz, who, Tampon Tim wants to put tampons in every boy's bathrooms in the state of Minnesota. Like this is your bench right here. You've got Gavin Newsom, AOC. You'll never nominate John Shapiro because he's a Jewish man. Let's just be honest about that. And you have Kamala Harris, Jasmine Crockett. Like this is who they have. This is the state of the Democrat Party, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Because hopefully, and they probably will lose in 2028. They probably will. They probably will lose. But that's exactly why I believe Kamala Harris would lose a Democrat primary in 2028. So that is going to wrap things up for today, folks. As always, drop down below, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And folks, we will catch you next time.